This program is sponsored by the following. And by the Cahoon Museum of American Art. Exhibit donors include these fine institutions and museums.
The Cahoon Museum of American Art was founded in 1984 as a museum dedicated to American art. We thought that the Cahoon Museum was the perfect museum to host an exhibition on Scrimshaw, which is a very unique, interesting, historical, and often overlooked art form. The idea for the exhibition began in our Collections and Exhibitions Committee. We had member Dr. Alan Granby, who suggested the idea of doing an exhibition on Scrimshaw, and we thought it would be a great fit for the museum. So we spent a number of years researching, selecting objects, and focusing how we could share this unique art form with our visitors and with the public. The exhibition Scrimshaw, the Whalers' Art, contains an incredible and diverse variety of Scrimshaw objects from many major museum collections and private collections across New England and the United States. Alan Granby, who's the guest curator of the exhibition, had long-standing relationships with collectors and museums in the field, so he really knew where some of the best objects were kept. We worked with 7 major museums and 15 private collectors to assemble one of the most spectacular assortments of Scrimshaw objects that's really ever been put together.
Wandering Whalemen and Their Art is a story of the life and work and creative spirit of the American whalemen, who created a unique art form called Scrimshaw. The whaling industry helped to form and grow the United States economy from 1775 to 1910. The number of vessels sailing from North America increased from 300 to 730. By 1849, whaling was the 5th largest industry in the country. As time went on, the whale ships became larger and stayed out longer. Conditions living on a whale ship were dirty, crowded, and the food was poor. Whaling was dangerous, and it was not infrequent for the whale to attack the 30-foot-long whaleboat with a 6-man crew and destroy it. There is a lot of confusion regarding the killing of whales versus the killing of elephants. Elephants were killed as far back in time as whales. However, elephants were killed solely for their ivory tusks, while whales were killed solely for the oil, which had a variety of purposes, chiefly to provide the fuel source to light the world. Ship owners and captains had no interest in whale's teeth or bone, because it had no value. The whalemen allowed to use the whale ivory or bone simply because it was not a commodity and was worthless. Weeks and months could pass without the sighting of a whale. 30 men, the average-sized crew, might find boredom with little to do. This downtime provided the whalemen a chance to practice the art of Scrimshaw. From the log of the ship Orion, out of Rochester, Massachusetts, Captain Obed Luce wrote on March 14, 1821, "Light breezes and pleasant weather. All hands employed scrimshanding." Scrimshaw is said to be amongst the earliest forms of American folk art. On the left, we see this giant whale's tooth that was out of the mouth of a large sperm whale, the only whales with teeth. This tooth actually weighs over 3 pounds and is 10 inches in length. The pair of teeth to the right from Mystic Seaport Museum are partially polished so that they're being made ready for the Scrimshander's work. On the left, we see a flat section of pan bone or whalebone from the jaw of a sperm whale. Applied to it is an engraving through which the Scrimshander would use a sail needle, which you can see to the right, to poke holes, thus creating the pattern of the image. He would then connect the dots and fill in the balance with various etching techniques. This interesting looking beak is from the albatross, which are the species of birds that followed the whalemen. It was made into a needle case to house the Scrimshander's needles. To the right is a beautifully polychromed engraved whale's tooth showing a vase with flowers. To the left at the center is a 19th century engraving featuring the same image, which was used by the Scrimshander as a model. On the left, we see a piece of baleen, which is the material found in the mouth of most whales, which strain their food through the baleen. These sheets of baleen could come in long lengths, this being a small section of one, and was used to create scrimshaw boxes as well as inlay material for all sorts of different forms of scrimshaw. In the center, we see a ring that was carved from a whale's tooth in the form of a book, with a disc-shaped abalone inlay. To the right, we see a half section of an abalone shell, which shows the unique pattern found inside an abalone shell. This magnificent box features multiple types of inlay, including abalone shell, mother of pearl, baleen, and ebony. At the top, we see a little panel of pan bone engraved with a patriotic image featuring a spread-winged eagle above the American shield. On the various sides of the box, we see cornucopia, hearts, and other forms of inlay. There are many types of utilitarian objects that Scrimshanders made. At the top, we see a whalebone busk. Below is a hearth broom made with baleen bristles, and the entire shaft is wrapped with baleen. On the left, we see a pan bone carved basket. I call this the picket fence variety because, like a picket fence, it has those various upright sections applied to the base and brought together with thin whalebone bands and fastened with little brass pins. To the right is a different form of basket made from a long sheet of pan bone. On the sheet, they would first draw the pattern on the bone and then cut out the pattern. Then, using steam, the Scrimshander would bend it into shape. The interlocking circular pattern is somewhat modified in the handle, which pivots or swings up and down. Here is a variety of different forms of scrimshaw. At the top is a masterfully carved cane made with 28 pieces of carved whale's teeth. At the top, we see a common form of sailor's carving called the monkey fist, and along the shaft, we see two different examples of sailor's knots called Turk's heads. To the left is an ivory carved pie crimper carved in the form of a human hand with the cuff of the shirt and 3 applied buttons made of brass. To the right, we see a steel claw hammer with a beautifully turned and shaped whalebone handle. This piece comes from the Nantucket Whaling Museum. Amongst the most complicated forms of scrimshaw is the swift. The swift was used to take a skein of wool and convert it into a ball. At the base of the swift, we see a number of turned and scribed green and red polychrome removable thread spools. This bi-purpose tool could be used as a swift or wool winder, or as a thread dispenser. Here we see a tooth which is now known to be the first example of American pictorial scrimshaw. The tooth was created by Edward Burdett, America's first identified scrimshander. This tooth is Burdett's first known work and is titled at the base, Japan Bound to the USA. Japan, in fact, was the name of the whale ship that Edward Burdett served on in the early part of his career. Unique to his style is the wavy flag, the whaleboats attached with gripes rather than with davits. You can see the intaglio style deep engraving in the hull, which was common to all of Burdett's teeth. Here we see a picture of Paul Vardaman, one of the great 20th century scrimshaw scholars. He wrote an article about this tooth, which you can see to the right, identifying all of the unique features that defines Burdett's style. On the top, we see whale ship with 3 whaleboats and gripes, the same kind of polychrome wavy flag, the banners, the similar border at the base, and Brant Point Lighthouse, which still sits at the entrance of Nantucket Harbor. Burdett was a Nantucketer who started whaling at a young age, and his career was brought to a sudden halt when he was out in a whaleboat and the line, which was uncoiling from the rope tub, caught around his ankle and hauled him into the water, and he was never seen again. This exemplifies the real danger in the whaling profession. On the top, we see the engraved title, engraved by Edward Burdett of Nantucket, on board of the ship William Tell. And then on the opposite edge, it says, New Bedford ship, S.M. Porter, Master. And then below, it's identifying the scene to the left, which states, William Thompson, cutting, boiling, and fast to a whale. Here's another smaller example of Edward Burdett's work with a similar border, flag, and so on. This one is titled in cursive writing at the base, made by Edward Burdett. This photograph was taken in New Bedford of Clifford Ashley, one of the great turn-of-the-century marine artists who focused on whaling. He wrote a book of engravings featuring whaling, and then later he did a whole history of whaling with this picture on page 303 with some of the whale teeth from his private collection. The book, Yankee Whalemen, was published in 1926, and the upper right, it states, this is the earliest dated piece of scrimshaw on record and is in the author's collection. The tooth is unsigned, but it is dated August 24th, 1829, which you can see on the detail to the right. This was engraved by another early Nantucket scrimshander, Frederick Myrick. Here is another Myrick tooth, and this one is signed Frederick Myrick and dated September 1st, 1829. You can see in the different areas of the tooth the various inscriptions. On the top edge of the tooth is the famous couplet that appears on most of Frederick Myrick's teeth. Death to the living, long live the killers, success to sailors' wives, and greasy luck to whalers. Frederick Myrick sailed on the ship Susan of Nantucket. Most of his teeth, of which there's about 35 known, feature the ship Susan and a whaling scene with an eagle. All of Meyrick's teeth were done between December of 1828 through the year 1829. Meyrick is credited as the first American scrimshander to both sign and date his work. It's believed that Edward Burdett, whose work we viewed a few moments ago, met an English scrimshander at the port of Maui, Hawaii, whose name is still unknown, but he has been dubbed the Britannia engraver. Because of the similarity in styles, it has been suggested that the Britannia engraver was Burdett's teacher. Like artists who have unique style, the same applies to scrimshanders. Here we see in this unique image of the whale at the center, where he's half in and half out of the water. The same intaglio-style deep carving that we saw in Burdett's whale ship hulls, we see used in this whale. The tooth is titled on its side, Charles of London Whaling. The whale has smashed the boat in half, and the 6 whaleman crew have been thrust into the air. The stove boat was a common element in Scrimshaw whaling scenes, depicting one of the occupational dangers in whaling. Other early engravers were the brothers William and Edward Hill. They rarely signed their work and served on the same whale ship. Their work is indistinguishable from each other, so we never really know if it's William or Edward's work, but we clearly know that it's the work of the Hill brothers. Like the Britannia engraver, their engraver was very deep and bold. They use very similar symbols. We see Britannia seated at the top, the alligator chasing the man, and the banner with Nelson's ship Victory, which is engraved in wonderful detail below. The reverse side shows the watching eye above the handshake and the lovebirds, Neptune in his chariot, and then a sailor with multiple English flags, cannon, along with the name Defiance, a British man of war. Some scrimshanders worked in multiple mediums. Here we see the work of the Hill brothers in a pan-bone box. You can recognize many of the same symbols or engravings that appear in his prior tooth on this box, which is dated 1834. This busk has many similar engravings and is the third Scrimshaw form showing the work by the Hill brothers. During Darwin's expedition, besides the sailing crew, he had an artist and a scrimshander. The scrimshander was James A. Bute, who was also a Royal Marine, and he was there to help to defend the ship if necessary. The title, "On Board the HMS Beagle," is written in the image to the right, below the picture showing men hauling small boats up the Santa Cruz River. Above that, we see a picture of the Beagle beached and rolled over on her side for repairs. The American scrimshander, Moses Denning, engraved this large tooth in brilliant color around 1840. We see that wonderful oversized polychromed American flag, the whaling scene in the foreground, and of great interest, a hot air balloon with a pair of American flags. Along the top edge, he signed the tooth, Moses R. Denning, and on the reverse, it depicts a fancifully dressed woman and her child in a very primitive fashion. This painting from the Nantucket Whaling Museum is an image of what is amongst the earliest, if not the earliest, example of a painting featuring American whaling by an American artist. It's titled Spermo Cutting in Whales on Japan, 1822, and then signed by the American artist J. Fisher. We can see a cutting in scene and the ship is surrounded by albatross birds that followed the whalemen and got nicely fed when they were processing a whale. To the right, we see a magnificent Scrimshaw tooth featuring a similar scene of the albatross birds flying around the ship with the whales and the boats in pursuit at the bottom of the image. The reverse of the tooth has a domestic scene of a hip-roofed federal house and lovely decorative borders. There are very few examples of these teeth, which are referred to as albatross teeth and were engraved in the 1840s. A second albatross tooth shows at the very top of the main mast a whaleman standing holding a long pole with a small flag at the end. This pole is called the waif, which was commonly thrown into the whale after killing it to help identify it when they needed to come back to haul it to the ship. The tooth has an inventory in white ink with the letters NH. Merlin Armstrong, who we see standing with his wife holding a walrus tusk, was one of the greatest collectors of the 20th century, and this picture was taken in the late 1950s, showing many of the pieces in his collection, some of which we will be seeing a little later in this presentation. The albatross tooth was an important item in this collection. Wilmington, Delaware was one of America's most southern whaling ports. The Mariners Museum and Gardens, in their collection, has a journal from the ship series of Wilmington dated 1834 to 1837. This journal was kept and illustrated by John Cleland, Jr. To the right, we see a crew list of the ship series with red stars pointing out John Cleland and 3 other crew members who each engraved several Scrimshaw teeth based on a Cleland drawing. There is a red star next to each of their names on the crew list, making it easier to locate them on the page. On the left is a watercolor by Cleland titled Ship Series Leaving St. Michael's, an island off the coast of Normandy. To the left, we see a detail with the name E.M. Chandler. It also states the vessel's name, Ship Series, on the opposite side of the banner. Below is an image of a ship in heavy seas off an English lighthouse. To the right, we see the opposite side of the tooth with an engraving of Jack Tar, the sailor, standing, leaning on an anchor with an eagle sitting on his shoulder, holding a banner with the famous War of 1812 slogan, "Free Trade and Sailors' Rights," with the American shield and color at the base of his leg. On September 26, 2008, Sotheby's auction in New York City auctioned off a tooth that was considered a major find. The tooth was signed at the top of the Presidium Arch, W.A. Gilpin. This is the first time we saw a signed tooth on board of the ship series. Similar to the Chandler tooth, we see Jack Tar, but in finer detail. This tooth also shows the eagle and the banner and the American shield. To the right, we see the Jack Tar pen and ink drawing by John Cleland from the logbook, which was the inspiration for the series Scrimshaw artists. Free trade and sailors' rights, like the teeth, appears on the banner with the addition of the ship's name, Series, in capital letters across the center of his shirt. To the left, another series tooth by the third Scrimshaw artist attributed to William Myers, whose name is also listed on the crew list, Meyer's work is very charming, but it's much more primitive in style than the others. These series artists also engraved different subject matter beyond just Jack Tar. To the right, we see a magnificent example of the artistry of William Gilpin. This tooth, titled Domestic Happiness, and to the right of it, we see the print source in a period engraving with the same title. Moving closer to the mid-19th century is the work of Thomas or Caleb Albro, who were whalemen on board the ship John Coggeshall of Newport, Rhode Island. All that information appears on the tooth. The detail to the left shows a large tub loaded with tools of the whalemen and is titled Whaleman's Coat of Arms. Like the Hill brothers, Caleb Albro and his brother both served on the same whale ship, and their work is indistinguishable unless signed. The picture on the bottom right shows the signature Caleb J. Albro, Portsmouth, Rhode Island, in a beautiful cursive hand. Another photo on the upper left is titled Coast of New Zealand, Ship John Coggeshall, Newport, Rhode Island. And then below the whaling scene is a tooth with the title Sperm Whale Fishery in the South Pacific Ocean. The opposite side of the tooth has one of the finest engraved examples of an American War of 1812 naval battle. To the left of the image is the rising sun with the face. This is one of the finest examples of Albro's work. An English scrimshander, who was also the ship's surgeon, was William L. Roderick. Here we see a fine engraved image of a whaling scene. This tooth is captioned on the tip, Tooth from a Whale Ship, captured March 30th, 1855. In the scene is a detailed depiction of a stove boat and Roderick's signature at the bottom right of the image. When we think of detail in Scrimshaw, we immediately think of the banknote engraver. Again, his name is still unknown, but you can see where the nickname came from because of the wonderful precision in his work. On the left side is a pair of teeth which are engraved on both sides. The obverse of each tooth depicts a sailor's farewell and then a woman thinking of her husband or lover off in the ship in the distance. On the opposite sides, we see a portrait with a magnificent oval border of a woman reading, and on the other, a woman playing guitar. His elaborate borders are very distinct. The eagle portraitist, another master scrimshander, who rendered fine detail, and in some cases even crisper or sharper detail than that of the banknote engraver. This fantastic two-sided tooth features an eagle with his wings up and the banner E Pluribus Unum, and polychrome American shield at his chest. On the opposite side, we see a formally dressed couple. He has his hat off, and he is courting a beautiful woman in the garden. Note the red cheeks on his face. A scrimshander with the nickname Naval Monument Engraver, who was active in the 1840s, used several of the 25 published engravings as subject matter for his teeth. The engravings were by Abel Bowman, who wrote the book, The Naval Monument, first published in 1836. These Bowman engravings of the War of 1812 battles were based on the oil paintings by an earlier artist, Phyllis Cornet. This tooth, which is amongst the most revered of the Naval Monuments engraver work, depicts two navel scenes, one on each side of the tooth. Both scenes are titled with great detail below the image. A rather unique tooth, shown here, depicts a map or a chart of a whale ship finding its way to its home port, New Bedford. The whale ship is sailing past the Elizabethan Islands. Each one is identified on the island itself. The reverse has a whaling scene, and again we see the detail from that tooth with the stove boat. The tooth has the printed title Alwilda the Female Pirate on the companion published engraving. The Alwilda engraving was a very popular source for many Scrimshander's work of the famed female pirate, this one being the finest known example. The polychromed engraved tooth is of particular high quality and shows her with her belt holding a dagger, a pistol, and her sword above her head. Here we see a brilliant pair of teeth with a splay of American flags. The color is a bit more intense and denser than we see in most Scrimshaw. The reason being, it's actually done with inlaid colored sealing wax rather than colored ink. The blue and red sealing wax appears to jump off the tooth with its bold color. The use of sealing wax goes back to the early days of Scrimshaw and was used by both Burdett and the Britannia engraver. To the right, we see one of the most famous and popular of all patriotic teeth. This tooth appears on the back dust jacket cover of the book Scrimshaw and Scrimshanders by E. Norman Flaterman, probably the finest and earliest Scrimshaw reference book. Another wonderful polychrome example of Scrimshaw is the tooth to the right, with a similar theme, with the addition of the English flag showing the bond between America and England that formed several years following the War of 1812. Moving into the late 1840s and into the 60s is the work of the professional scrimshander Nathaniel S. Finney. This large pan bone stands almost 40 inches in height and weighs at least 30 pounds. It is heavily engraved with a magnificent scene of the American patriots circled around an eagle above a monument to George Washington. It's the earliest dated and signed example of Finney's work. You can see the date, 1857, and his name engraved at the base. To the left is a cutout from the evening bulletin of the San Francisco newspaper, the evening of June 16, 1858, and it actually describes this piece of Scrimshaw. It is one of the earliest examples of Scrimshaw being written about in the actual period shortly after the piece was made. Finney more commonly used walrus tusks than whale's teeth for his Scrimshaw. Here we see a fine engraved pair of walrus tusks with patriotic figures and eagles. Finney signed each of these tusks on the reverse. A rare whale's tooth by Finney appears on the right. Note the polychrome engraved American naval warship below a spread-winged eagle with American flag. The 13 engraved stars are filled with red sealing wax. The reverse shows a portrait of a young woman titled Grace Darling. In the early morning of September 7th, 1838, a young girl, Grace Darling, daughter of an English lighthouse keeper, looked out her window and saw a wreck of the ship Forfarshire laid on the rocks. She and her father, in the worst of conditions, rowed out braving the seas and saved several of the passengers. Grace received national awards and became the subject for a Staffordshire figure showing their lighthouse and her boat. On the left is a 19th century corset with a busk laying above the pocket where it would have been placed to stiffen the corset. The pan-bone busk at the top right has a wonderful poem that the scrimshander engraved for his wife, the recipient of the gift. On the reverse, the caption, engraved on board the ship South Boston, provides some important provenance regarding the history of the busk. Below we see a double busk, where a panel of baleen was placed together in the back with a piece of pan bone. The baleen was pierced carved in an interlocking circle pattern, and the image pops with the use of the pan bone white background. To the right is shown with a heart, a bird of paradise, and a sailor holding navigational instruments as he walks on the globe. Besides engraving on whale's teeth, scrimshanders use flattened panels of whalebone or pan bone that they cut from the large jaw bones or pan bones of the whale. These bones could be as long as 25 feet. Here is the only known pan bone signed Edward Burdett, and this pan bone is approximately 20 inches in width. On the left, we see Ship William Tell, identified in the title below, and the ship portrait shows many of the same stylistic features of Burdett's teeth we viewed earlier. The intaglio style carved hole, the gripes on the whaleboats, and the wax-filled American flag, once again, are the common elements shown here. This pan bone tells a story in two parts. To the left, the ship William Tell is sailing along in pleasant seas. Then just a little to the right of center, all of a sudden, the waves start to become huge, and we see the title, Lost Her Rudder. The flag flying from the foremost is upside down, which was a common practice to signal ship in distress. The top section of all three masts are blown away, and we can see Burdett put the navigation points of where this occurred, and he added a second title, Got Shipwrecked. The small-sized pan bone is signed in the lower right, William Roderick, and is titled The Death. The bloodied water with the stove boat with the mothership watching in the distance is similar to the Roderick tooth we saw earlier. Many people think of scrimshaw as engraving on whale's teeth or bone, and we refer to that type of scrimshaw as pictorial scrimshaw. There are many forms of carved and constructed scrimshaw, which is referred to as utilitarian. There are many types of utilitarian scrimshaw, which we will explore now. Pie crimpers were extremely popular for scrimshanders to carve for a gift back home. Crimpers are amongst the most creative and diverse in these many forms. Below, we see a photograph of the collection of Frank Wood, who was one of the first curators of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. He had an extensive collection of pie crimpers, several of which are featured in this picture, indicating that crimpers have been collected for over 100 years. Here are a few views of a metamorphic themed crimper, which has a human fist at the end, followed by an octopus with all 8 arms, and then what's called a hippocanthus, which is a horse which has a tail of a whale. Serpents were often carved on scrimshaw pie crimpers, canes, and other utilitarian items. This dramatic crimper shows the human hand and arm crushing the throat of the serpent, showing his incised teeth and tongue. The wheel of this crimper is pierced and has the detail of a star, and has an applied fork which was used to pierce the pie so it could breathe. To the left is a beautifully carved hand clutching a two-armed device holding two different wheels, each pierced with a different design. Amongst the most graceful of all known pie crimpers is this dog with a wonderfully flowing whale's tail. Below is a unicorn pie crimper of a running horse-like animal, also with a whale's tail. One of the most complicated and beautifully carved pie crimpers that exists comes from Mystic Seaport Museum. It is called the gift crimper because it was given either by PHR or received by PHR on July 15, 1857. The wheel has the letters that spell out the word fidelity. What a magnificent gift. Here we see a combination crimper with a pan-bone box by the whaleman Andrew Jenny of Fairhaven, Mass. Shown here, we see pictorial scrimshaw in combination with utilitarian. This magnificent country scene is polychrome engraved, which matches the engraving on the accompanying box. This rare hat box is from the collection of Burlett Armstrong, whose collection we saw at the beginning of this presentation. The box has these very large fingers, all made from pan bone, and the fingers have these large circular forms at the end, and they are referred to as lollipop fingers. The basket has a swing pan bone handle and a bone and wood removable top. This magnificently inlaid baleen box has engraved hearts at the connection joint that are filled with gold leaf. The top rim of the box has the engraved words, "Made on board the bark Albury of Mystic, JBG, 1846. This information adds substantially to the rarity and historical importance of the item. Further, we see the superimposed five-pointed stars made with contrasting woods with ivory inlays in the form of hearts. Inlaid wood boxes were very popular items for scripshanders. This one is special because it is signed, made by Captain George Douglas around 1840. We see the top of the box with the Indian and other figures and 13 inlaid stars. The front has a magnificent patriotic shield with polychrome stars on the flags above the spread-winged eagle with two American ships. Many of the scrimshaw baskets were created in several forms. Here we see a whalebone tub with nicely engraved polychrome borders. Above the two pairs of baleen bands applied to hold the basket together with metal pins going through the baleen, fastening it to the tub. I don't know if I dare call this a wastebasket because it's too beautiful to be such a mundane object, but a basket it is for sure. This tall basket has a wonderful pierced design in its stays. This is the only adjustable height two-armed whalebone candlestick I know to exist. The rolling pin above has turned ivory finials and has whalebone sections alternating with wood. The large bird cage is one of several that were created. This one has a dome top with whale ivory handle. It has a working pull-out tray or cleaning tray, and you can see in the front the door opens so the bird can be fed. Figural forms are very collectible. Here we see the loop neck knitting needles with the swan heads and various exotic island wood inlay. This is a rare small boat tiller, which was carved from a giant walrus tusk, which features a rope work handle. Below is a scale that was made by a whaleman that jumped ship and hoped to find his fortune in the gold fields of California after 1849. Tools were very commonly made out of whalebone. It was a very strong substance, and here we see a block plane and Josiah Robinson's lathe made out of oak and whalebone. Whalebone blocks were often used and sometimes made of whale's teeth or whalebone. This pair being by far the largest known examples. This image shows an ambrotype, a photographic process popular in the 1850s and 60s. It is signed Dunshee and Company Artist, New Bedford Photographic Studio. It shows Captain Marble and his family with his young son holding a child's or miniature whalebone walking stick. Below we see a carved child's cane with a hammer of similar size. Here we see an early teaching tool. This small round whalebone box contains round whalebone discs. On one side is black, showing capital letters. On the reverse side is red, showing lowercase letters. This unique sled was made on board the ship Commodore Morris by Captain Winslow. The carved top sections in the form of clenched fists are carved from whale ivory. On the reverse of the sled, in a sort of yellow gold paint, he wrote his son's name, Willie H. Winslow. Rarely we see such complicated items with so many pieces still complete. This whalebone checkerboard has whale's tooth turned checker pieces, all of which fit in the slide-out drawer. To the right, we see an equally rare whale's tooth carved chess set. The board is made of alternating mahogany and whale's tooth inlaid squares. On the left, coming from Heritage Museum and Gardens, we see this beautifully engraved child's bed. Note the engraved eagle and flags at the base of the bed, and at the inside of the headboard, the pair of lovebirds. To the right, we see a mahogany doll's cradle dated 1861 with the beautifully inlaid vines and inlaid tortoiseshell flowers at the end of the vines. This rare item once was in the collection of Ernst Gates, curator of the Jib Boom Club in the whaling town of New London, Connecticut. The club was founded in the 1870s for a retired whaleman. Mantelpieces came in various forms and styles. The one to the left, attributed to the Fanning Island artist, who was active in the early 1850s, shows two pairs of walrus tusks on a baleen stand. To the right is a clock tower made with tortoiseshell and whale ivory on a wooden base. There is a pocket where a watch could be mounted at the center. This mantelpiece was called a marriage mantle, and it was made by J.S. and given to A.H. as a wedding gift with 4 whale's teeth colorfully engraved with flowers. This cane or walking stick is one of the most famous and highest quality Scrimshaw canes. Note the serpent wrapping around the clenched fist and winding around the wrist. The serpent scales are engraved. Even the serpent's tongue is raised and is projecting past the hand. There's a detailed photo showing a silver inlaid and tortoise shell double fluke harpoon. It is rare to see images of whaling implements inlaid into a cane. There are various types of scrimshaw canes. This one on the left shows a highly inlaid version of scrimshaw cane or walking stick. Towards the end of the inlay is the 18-karat gold cross with the date 1837. It's the only example I know of gold used in scrimshaw. At the center we see an architectural walking stick with a carved bone rope turn post inserted into each of its two cages. To the right is a cane made from a narwhal tusk. The top section has a carved fist with rope twist wrist made from whale ivory. Scrimshaw swifts were popular. I mentioned one early on, and again they were made to turn a skein of wool into a ball, which could be placed on the top of the cut finial if the user was interrupted in their work. The swift is the work of Captain Henry Daggett, who is credited with 6 known swifts. All his swifts had inlaid star-engraved discs applied to the grip and the top finial. He also used American coins, and we can see the eagle coin inset into the front of the table clamp. To accompany the swift, Daggett made an inlaid box to store the swift. The swift was commissioned by a fellow whaling captain, Captain Mayhew, as a wedding gift for his wife Carolyn. At the center of the box, in the front, we see an image of Captain Mayhew with his walking stick, holding hands with his new bride, Carolyn. On the top of the clamp, we see a silver plaque with the engraved name, Carolyn. And there is a panbone plaque inlaid at the top of the wood box with Carolyn Mayhew's initials. Carolyn was a remarkable woman. She accompanied her husband on a whaling voyage. Many of the crew became sick with typhoid, including Captain Mayhew. She took over the command of the vessel, became the navigator, and sailed the ship safely to its destination while nursing the crew back to health. In addition to her skills already mentioned, she was a trained artist and painted watercolor topographical illustrations for the logbook of various islands that they saw on their voyage. One of the rarest and most beautifully designed examples of the utilitarian scrimshaw is this unique whalebone wall pocket. It measures about 28 inches in length and about the same in height, with the interlocking chain holder from which it hung from a wall. It was used to hold periodicals or documents. The design, with its various sized 5-pointed stars, is remarkable. The corner stars and some of the sides have a total of 13 applied acorn finials of turned whale ivory. This unique item is well known and has been published in many books. Looking at these treasured pieces of art from another era provides a view back into the human mind and soul. The men that set out on whaling voyages certainly did not do so with the intent of creating art. They set out to make money and conquer the beast and to see and experience the world. Yet, at the same time, they made art, and today only the art remains. can we say that the making of art is a yearning from the most gifted of us, but in all of us. The Whalemen took something that was dead and created something that expressed their personal vision, no matter how primitive or refined the result was. So many of these expressions of art, if properly cared for, will become everlasting.
The following program is a multimedia presentation based upon the extraordinary coffee table book, Wandering Whalemen and Their Art, a collection of Scrimshaw masterpieces, by Dr. Alan Granby. May be purchased at the Cahoon Museum of American Art and online here.
Oh, was you ever on the Congo River? Blow, boys, blow. If fever makes the white man shiver, blow me, bully boys, blow. A Yankee ship come down the river, blow, boys, blow. Her masts and yards, they shone like silver, blow me, bully boys, blow. And who do you think was the skipper of her? Blow, boys, blow. Why, Shanghai Brown, the sailor robber, blow me, bully boys, blow. What do you think she's got for cargo? Blow, boys, blow. Why, black sheep that have run the embargo, blow me, bully boys, blow. What do you think they've got for dinner? Blow, boys, blow. Oh, monkey hearts and donkey's liver, blow me, bully boys, blow. Yonder comes the arrow packet, blow.